Hello everyone, welcome to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As ever, I am your host. Now we're bringing you a little bonus episode. This was actually originally designed to be a Patreon episode, but I thought it would be nice to drop it on the main feed as well. As I'm sure all of you know, last week we lost the great David Lynch, and so I got together with friend of the pod, Steph McKenna, and we discussed our love for Lynch as a filmmaker, particularly as a horror filmmaker, and we went through all of his work and his career. It was a really lovely, quite cathartic, quite therapeutic episode to discuss with Steph last week, and we got so many nice comments from people as well. Anyway, I thought it would be nice for this occasion to drop it as a freebie on the main feed. And don't forget, if you want to check out more episodes like this, we have got a whole back catalogue of similar episodes on Patreon. We do a Legends of Horror series where we talk about many great figures of the horror genre. We did an episode on William Friedkin just after he passed away, also Roger Corman, Wes Craven, Vincent Price, and a whole bunch of other people. So there are hundreds more episodes like this over on patreon.com/evolution of horror. But for now, enjoy our David Lynch special.
An idea comes, and you see it, and you hear it, and you know it.
How does it come?
It comes like on a TV in your mind. People we don't do anything without an idea. So they're beautiful gifts. And I always say you desiring an idea is like a bait on a hook.
Yeah.
It can pull them in. And if you catch an idea that you love, that's a beautiful, beautiful day. And you write that idea down so you won't forget it. And that idea that you caught might just be a fragment of the whole, whatever it is you're working on. But now you have even more bait. Thinking about that small fragment, that little fish, will bring in more. And they'll come in and they'll hook on. And more come in, and pretty soon you might have a script, or a chair, or a painting, or an idea for a painting.
But they come as in small...
More often than not, small fragments. I like to think of it as in the other room, the puzzle is all together, but they keep flipping in just one piece at a time.
In the other room...
Over there.
in a sense, David, there's always another room somewhere.
That's a beautiful thing to think about.
Let's think about it a bit.
No, you think about it.
Hello, Steph McKenna.
Oh, hi, Mike Muncer.
Hello. Oh, God. 2025 is really kicking our asses already, isn't it?
Off to a shitty start, isn't it? We've had all kinds of conversations today. Yeah. It's like the world is literally burning.
Literally. Yep.
Yeah.
I know. So we're here, obviously, to talk about David Lynch, who, obviously we lost a couple of days ago. And oh my God, I've never actually seen... Obviously, he is somebody we'll get into who's so important to people like me and you, Steph. But I actually wasn't prepared for the wave, the outpouring on social media as well,
Absolutely. Like when directors and actors, especially in, the horror genre, have died, I've got this like pocket of, my friends and people I know on the internet. And of course, there's a big outpouring there, and I'm seeing so much. There's so many other aspects of my life, like my family circle or, colleagues at work or neighbours or so many other people in my life that, it might not necessarily touch in the same way. So they're, scrolling through and they're just posting about whatever on Instagram. But this is like across the board. Yeah. People of all ages. It's kind of... For me, I mean, Bowie is the last person that, for me, we had this level of outpouring.
There's been a lot of mentions of Bowie, actually, right? Like that people are making that connection, that it's that big a deal to the world, almost. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. It really is, and you kind of. I think I'd sort of, in my little niche area and with my little echo chamber of all my friends, of course, David Lynch is a huge, huge deal, but it's been really heartwarming, actually.
Yeah.
It's sad. Of course it's sad. And I'm gutted and you're gutted, but it's actually been a really nice time today, kind of scrolling through social media. And it's just been a constant wave of just like warmth and gratitude, and because he was such a warm and compassionate and playful person as well. So everyone's not just celebrating the work that he created. I think as a human being, David Lynch is someone that even those who didn't connect necessarily with his film work had such a deep respect for him.
I agree. I think that's what it is, right? It's not just his work. It's that, unlike some other directors, everyone knew David Lynch so well as a man too. The guy that did the weather reports during COVID, or, you know, the guy that played Gordon Cole in Twin Peaks, or the guy who has that incredible cameo at the end of Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans, right, as well. Like, which actually now, that ending is going to have even more kind of poignancy to that Fabelmans film, right? Because I think that was probably one of his last kind of on-screen film appearances, I'm guessing, you know. I think that's it. He was just a person that everyone kind of loved and wanted to know, didn't they, you know?
It's... His work could be challenging and surreal and eerie and violent, but he had such like a powerfully positive approach to life. And, you know, over the sort of many years of being a fan and listening to the audio, I listened to the audio book actually of Room to Dream. It was the year before last, and which is brilliant. Like, listening to the audiobook version of it with him is just absolutely magic. You know, he's got such a voice, hasn't he? And there's such a way of storytelling, but you really amass this sense of he was a deeply spiritual person. He was curious. He was supportive, a mentor for many, like a lifelong friend to so many people. And that's what's really, really sad, actually. I think we've kind of, his filmmaking work in particular has sort of wound down over the years, and that's probably what he's known best for. But he's just been a lifelong friend to so many, and he's a visionary, you know, artist, but just what a life to celebrate. Just
incredible. Yeah, I agree. I think there's just something, I think, and we'll talk about this as we go, but I think you're right. Like, he makes these quite, you know, provocative, confrontational, like scary, violent films, but also there is this heart, this warmth, this sort of cheesiness almost, right? Like this kind of absolute kind of earnestness about the absolute best of humanity as well as the absolute worst, right? And I think that's what's really interesting, and you don't necessarily expect that going into David Lynch, actually, that he also has this real kind of earnest heart to him, you know? Yeah,
he's kind of living on a different plane to what I'm, you know, because he's through his he had like a really, you know, quite white picket fence childhood, and, you know, I think he was quite a popular kid at school, and you know, really, really likable, but he wasn't naive to the reality of the world. He could see kind of what lay underneath the really, as you say, the dark, the violent, the cruel underbelly of what life could be. And yet he always seemed to be having a good time. He always approached something with like this huge level of curiosity. Like, everything was a question mark to be explored, wasn't it? And to play with and to feel out and to try out and to kind of dig into. And his whole approach to existence, I can't imagine him facing, you know, he's been ill for a little while now, and I think we all know that with his emphysema, it has been deteriorating, but he was so adamant that he wouldn't retire. Yeah. You know, art was his life force, not just his profession. And you can't imagine him sort of looking down the barrel of, you know, sort of mortality without, I can just see him being at peace with it, because he's just, he's a guy who, again, he'd probably just approach it with a question mark, and he's just such an energizing force. And like you say, it's just such an interesting juxtaposition, because on one level you would watch his films or look at his photography or his artwork and just go like, this must be a really fucked up guy. And he's just, he's like Mr. Wholesome.
I know. And I think that so often is the case, I find, with the best sort of particularly horror filmmakers, actually, is they're the people, you know, people talk so much about filmmakers like Wes Craven and Tobe Hooper and David Cronenberg, all actually these very kind of kind, soft people in a way, right? And actually, they were people that were just scared of a lot of the world. Like, they found the world genuinely scary. And I think that's the same with David Lynch. Obviously, he sees a lot of beauty in the world, but also he was scared by a lot of things. You know, like that memory he has famously that influenced Blue Velvet of that naked woman coming to his kind of front lawn when he was a kid, and he was so freaked out by it and what had happened to her, and that idea of criminals and violent men, and he's kind of intrigued by it, but also he himself was terrified by it, I think, right? And I think that is what I think the best horror filmmakers get right, is that like they approach that stuff with fear. So we do at the same time, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. Fear and kind of almost like a childlike wonder, I guess. Yeah. He's not fearful, but not afraid to kind of dig into what that is about. And
me and you, Steph, we kind of know each other because of David Lynch in a way, right? Because your first ever appearance on the podcast was to talk about Eraserhead. That was the first Lynch film I ever covered on the podcast as well. And we had a big, long conversation that day about kind of who is David Lynch, I guess, and kind of like how we would describe his films and that kind of thing. But, you know, it's and I'm going to ask you this question again now, Steph, and it's such a hard thing to answer. But like, how would you describe David Lynch's filmmaking style, I guess?
Oh God, it is hard. So I think he defies meaning in a way that I think his filmmaking in particular, it invites a lot of like intellectualization. It invites a lot of analysis. There's so many moving parts, but for all of that, it also kind of, his filmmaking always defies that meaning and that explanation as well. So he's a maker of art that doesn't necessarily prioritize like story or a cohesive meaning. For me, it's always been much more, and what has stuck with me about a lot of his filmmaking and sort of television in particular is that like a feeling will linger with me, or a reaction, or something sensory, you know, something that you hear or that you see. It's something kind of quite deep within you. So that for me is what sticks at the foremost of my mind when I think of something that's kind of David Lynch, or that we would describe as Lynchian. And it's that, it's the, as you said, that approach to kind of wonderment towards dream and reality, the surrealism, the bleeding of like the nightmare and the hallucinatory, what is real, what is a dream, and how those two things interweave and how they are indistinct. That's something I think of a lot with the relation to David Lynch. And sound.
Oh my God, yeah.
His approach to sound, and, you know, he has so much of a legacy, but sound is something I think about a lot with regards to him. Not just, I mean, he was a musician, he's a prolific musician, painter, photographer, just about everything. But, you know, he's had a huge impact on music, especially in his later life, but his sound in his film, you know, the use of sound that's kind of diegetic or baked into a scene, and that which is kind of, you know, can't really be placed there, and can the characters hear it, can they not, or constant industrial churning in the background, or amazing needle drops. That feels very Lynchian to me. That kind of the parallels that he draws, the antithesis between the dark and the bleak, and with the absurd and the pulpy. You know, you often don't know whether to laugh or to be scared, to look away. You're just not sure how to react when you're watching his work, because you know, something like Twin Peaks is, for me, it's fun and it's soap opera-y and it's melodramatic, but it's also, you know, such a dark and traumatic story. And there are moments in that are so raw and guttural and freaky. And you find yourself kind of mortified and entertained and laughing and crying at the same time. He does. He likes to blend a bit of everything. That's
right. All the extremes, right? Like the word Lynchian is now famously, it was actually added to the English dictionary, Oxford English Dictionary, right? As well. Like it's used, and we've done it ourselves when we've talked about new movies or filmmakers. We might describe things as Lynchian, right? And the Oxford definition of Lynchian is juxtaposing surreal or sinister elements with mundane mundane, everyday environments and using compelling visual images to emphasize a dreamlike quality of mystery or menace. Which I guess is as good a definition as any, right? Like, I think that's right. Everything you said there, like, he puts mood first and narrative second, I guess, right? I think that's the most important part. And obviously, like, he started as an artist, as in like a painter, and he also made music. So you're right. I think those elements, the sound, the music that he famously creates in his movies, and then the imagery that he often, is inspired by his paintings and artwork and drawings and sketches, all of that comes together in the medium of film, but not necessarily to tell a coherent, like, A to B to C story in a way, right? It's more about, like, what feels right. And obviously he's so famous for those stories as well about things going wrong and then in almost improving his work, right? I think this is the other thing I really admire about him, is this almost the opposite to somebody like Kubrick, right? Who planned and kind of meticulously made sure everything was just so. Lynch, he has so many stories about, like, Mulholland Drive started as a failed TV pilot and then he stuck an ending on it and it became this entirely new, beautiful thing, right? And, all those stories about Twin Peaks, about a light was faulty and it was strobing and Lynch was like, leave it, and it added to the mood. Or he accidentally caught the actor Frank Silver in the mirror in the background of a shot and then he became Bob, and all these things that he speaks about, kind of acting and reacting to the environment around you and then using that as part of the story, I suppose. And you get that even with the stuff, like, I think it's in the documentary The Art Life, right, where he's like building a piece of furniture and then suddenly he'll decide midway through that it's not going to be a cabinet, it's going to be a table or something. And, like, he's definitely one of those people that I think he, like, takes signs from the universe as to what this art should be. Like, it's almost like it's making itself almost, and I love that about him.
Absolutely. Yeah. And he was doing that, like, through right to the end of his life, wasn't he?
Yeah.
On those, and like you say, he's sort of like it's like internet famous for a particular generation now. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, David Lynch, that guy who makes the weather forecast videos on YouTube. Yeah, of course. Yeah, first and foremost. But he's always making something or trying something, creating something, bringing something to life. And he doesn't always have, like, a precise roadmap. No. But he does have, a precise vision in a way. And he's someone that he's a perfectionist in some ways. But as you say, in others, he kind of throws it to the wall and sees what sticks. Yeah, and totally. There's no definitive answer. He's open to it all. And somehow, for someone with a filmography, and I feel like this with David Bowie, I feel like this with Prince, it's like, oh yeah, absolutely, love. There are parts of their back catalogues that just don't work for me.
Sure, yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. There are parts of David Lynch's filmography that I've only watched once, or I'm just like, it's just impenetrable for me. It just doesn't work. But that's what I like.
We all know
about
you're talking about Inland Empire stuff.
I am talking about Inland Empire. That's my one-word review.
Speaking of, like, making a film, not knowing what you're making, right? I mean, that is the perfect example, right, of him just experimenting with digital cameras and essentially, like, not really knowing what that was until it was finished. And I couldn't tell you what that film was. None of us could, really, right? But he clearly made something that he was really proud of, and it's like pure homemade experimental filmmaking, isn't it? So yeah, you're right. I think that's important too, that not all of his stuff is perfect. And even I'm talking about this a lot on, on my other podcast where we're talking about Twin Peaks, because Twin Peaks is like my favorite show of all time. But even I can see that it's not perfect. Oh my God.
You mean season 2? The James chapter, yes.
James and Evelyn Marsh, exactly. Like Ben having a nervous breakdown and thinking he's a Confederate soldier, and like all of those kind of things. It's like, what on earth is going on here? And I know that some of that stuff was beyond David Lynch's control. There were other elements, but I think all of that actually is what makes Twin Peaks so special, I think. Like, that it's imperfect, that it's not just this one complete thing, that it was messy, and it's like 6 or 7 different shows, and different people watch Twin Peaks and would watch a completely different thing to what I watch, you know? And I think that is also what's so interesting about his work.
Yeah, and behind the scenes of David's life is genuinely like absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
The way his childhood, the way he grew up, his painting, his journey into filmmaking, all of everything that happened behind the scenes of these things kind of coming to fruition and coming to life. It's just a roller coaster, but it's just endlessly fascinating. Just such a storyteller from beginning to end. It just he made me, like, as a young person watching film. I mean, I didn't get into him properly until like my later teens, sort of university age. He made me pay so much closer attention to the way that a film makes me feel, and the emotion, rather than always thinking about the traditional narrative storytelling or the message. He made me think about that inextricable, strange Venn diagram between the humorous and the grotesque.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the horror of suburbia, the uncanniness of the mundane. There are all these things that I don't think I thought about in filmmaking as much until I watched him. And some of it I watched when I was younger and I just didn't get it, and then I came back to it years later. Like Mulholland Drive was a film that when I first watched it I was like I think I like it. And then I didn't watch it for years, and then I came back to it and it's like, this is one of my favorite films now.
I think that's another really important thing about him. I've certainly found this, that with nearly every single one of his pieces of work, I've had to watch it at least twice to fall in love with it. Like, genuinely. Apart from maybe Blue Velvet, that's the only one I can think of where first time I ever watched it, I was like, perfect, no notes, that is a masterpiece. And in a way, that movie has a more kind of complete, accessible vibe to it, right? But Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, Eraserhead for sure. Twin Peaks: The Return too. These are things that you first watch it and you go, I just don't understand this. Like, what am I supposed to be getting from this? You know, and it can be frustrating, and there are moments of brilliance and then moments when you want to throw something at the telly because it's so frustrating and impenetrable, and then you come back
boring.
To it. Sometimes it can be really slow and boring. Exactly. And then you come back to it a second time and your expectations are a bit different, and suddenly you see the piece of art that he is making, not the piece of art that you want it to be in your head, right? And I think that was the point, that was the entire point almost, it felt like, of Twin Peaks: The Return, like kind of messing in a way with people's expectations and telling the story that he wanted to tell and not the story that I think we all just thought we wanted as like Twin Peaks obsessives, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. He just absolutely pushed the boundaries of our experience watching television or watching filmmaking, just really challenging us to sit there with it, especially with something like The Return. You're sitting there thinking, why am I doing this? What am I? And yet I'm still with it. And I come out the other end thinking that was absolutely brilliant. And
he's very good at endings, I'll tell you that.
He is.
I think he's incredible at beginnings, openings, setting up a mystery, setting up a hook, and he's incredible at endings as well. Just phenomenal.
And a lot of people can't stick an ending,
No.
A lot of people can't stick an ending. And yet his, the way that he opened, you said Twin Peaks, the opening of Twin Peaks and, the discovery of Laura Palmer's body, like, is there a single crime procedural since then that has not taken inspiration from that? Like, that was a game changer. Like, Blue Velvet opening with the ear and the just unreal, just hooks you in to all its kind of pulpy noir goodness, and then takes you on a journey that you're just not expecting.
Yeah. Oh, God, I completely agree. So you touched upon this briefly already, but tell me about your history with him. Like, when did you really kind of fall in love with his work, what was the first film of his where you were like, I get it, I love him now as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I think so. As I said, I tried to get into Lynch at a younger age when he cropped up a lot as an influence on, I think, musicians in particular for me. And I'd listened to the Lost Highway soundtrack before I saw the film because it had Nine Inch Nails, because it had Bowie, because it had Smashing Pumpkins. You know,
it's his like edgiest film, isn't it?
Oh,
Lost
it
Highway.
is.
Yeah.
I was like, I've got to be into this because, you know, I'm reading Kerrang and it's telling me I should be into this. And, you know, it took a while for it didn't work for me until my later teens and, you know, first year of like really early university when I watched Twin Peaks for the first time. And that, of course, for so many of us was such a pivotal pop culture moment for me personally and for television in general. I remember, you know, even my mum, who was not a David Lynch fan, saying, you know, oh yeah, absolutely, water cooler moment. You know, when that came out, we were all talking about it. And so, yeah, Twin Peaks absolutely was where it started for me. And I watched both seasons of that by myself every evening after university and was just completely, you know, enraptured. And then, of course, 25 years later, when The Return returned as, you know, another television milestone, that is one of, I've just got so many nice memories because of David Lynch. Like that was one of watching The Return week by week with my friends because they always came over and we watched it together. Yeah. That was like one of my favorite viewing experiences ever because of that togetherness. And it was such a contrast to watching it solo as a student. Yeah. So that, you know, that meant such a lot to me. I think I probably mentioned when we talked about Eraserhead that, me and my partner Wes, we've been together for 12 years now, and Lost Highway was the first thing. David Lynch was the first thing we bonded over.
Amazing.
Like, we went for a drink and we'd been talking about Lost Highway. He bought me a Lost Highway CD, the soundtrack on CD.
Oh, incredible.
You know, and I was like, well, okay, yeah, he might be a keeper. Getting really drunk and watching Fire Walk with Me with friends at the cinema with like David Lynch themed cocktails. Like, as a young viewer, his films, especially like the Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, they were definitely some of the first films for me that really played with the veil between dream and reality, and that pushed me to pay attention to the feeling and the motion rather than the story, and really shook up my perception of what filmmaking and visual storytelling could do and paved the way for so much. But yeah, it definitely took me a while. I was a young adult, I would say, when I first got into it. And then it's just been kind of a love affair ever since. And when my mum passed away in late 2023, and I found myself like desperately clutching for comfort from people and things, and a lot of older people actually. I needed to speak with people, and sort of, I just needed people around me that had been through something similar. I was, really clutching at straws, and David Lynch was there. It sounds silly, but his work talks a lot about death and about fear, as you say, and he's addressed those things numerous times in his interviews. Yeah. And the Log Lady says that death is a change, not the end. And I've really carried that with me. You know, it's like blue skies all the way, and it really, really helps. Yeah. You can't underestimate how much an effect those things can have when you really encounter those life-changing moments. Like he was, I said to you earlier, like I think it was either on his birthday or on Father's Day once I posted a picture of David Lynch and said, "Happy birthday, Dad," or whatever, and people thought it was my actual dad. But, he was like a strange uncle-father figure to me in a kind of, pop cultural way. So it's just a phenomenal impact on my life. And I know for you, it's absolutely the same. I'm so glad you were the person that broke this news to me, Mike, because I haven't looked at my phone.
I know.
And
I was
so
like, I need to tell Steph.
How do I do that? I'm so pleased it was, because My friend Sam was on the tube going home from work and he had his directed by David Lynch hat on and someone went, it sucks, doesn't it? And he was like, what? Like, you're like, no, that's not the way I want to find out. So I'm so glad it was you, of all people, that broke that news to me because,
I know. And
I knew you really felt it.
I don't know if you've had this, but I've had, obviously, he means so much to me. He's my favourite filmmaker. And obviously, I've spoken about that a lot over the years on mic because I sort of wasn't prepared for my inbox and my mentions. Like, it was like I had lost a family member.
So
like,
sorry
people
for your
literally
loss,
have been
Mike,
sending me, and they're still today. People are sending me condolences and stuff, which I love because he does mean so much to me. And yeah, I have a very similar sort of origin story to you in that regard. Like, I saw Mulholland Drive a little bit too young. I was probably about 13, 14. And so I thought it was incredibly sexy, for one thing, as like a,
of course,
as like a pubescent boy.
Some ladies kissing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember specifically thinking how good that first hour was and how intrigued by this mystery I was. But then when we get to the final act, it was too much for my little brain. And I was like, this is a load of nonsense. I don't understand, and I kind of dismissed it a bit. And then it wasn't until a few years later, probably I was kind of A-level age. I was 17, 18, when me and my friends kind of discovered together David Lynch. And I think you're so right about, I have the exact same thing as you. I have these memories, really happy memories of being with friends watching David Lynch. Like me and my two best friends at the time at school kind of discovered Eraserhead, and we watched that all together, and then Blue Velvet, and then we got the Twin Peaks box set and we all watched Twin Peaks season 1 together. And just that kind of absolute fascination, the weirdness, talking about what the hell it all means, and also thinking of ourselves as kind of young creatives. And we used to make films, and I was studying film, and so anytime we would ever make any kind of film, it would always be David Lynch inspired. Like, let's do something weird and
Lynchian film. Yeah,
because it was,
let's put some chevrons in this, and
exactly. Always, like and I think that's the thing. Like, when you first get to know him when you're young, you just think of him as like, he's the weird guy. He makes the weird films, and then you realize actually the more film you watch, the more cinema you watch, and the more kind of like, I don't know, bad impersonators there are out there, and other filmmakers that try and do weird, but they do weird for weird's sake. And that's the other thing about Lynch, I think, that you learn as you get older and you watch his films more, that he's not doing weird for weird's sake, right? He's not deliberately trying to, I think, baffle us or frustrate us or anything. He's telling the story the way he thinks it needs to be told, and putting across the mood or the feeling that he thinks we should be feeling in that moment, And again, like, that is something that I think you grow to kind of learn about him the more you return to his work, Yeah,
absolutely. And you may not understand it, but you'll certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
That view of the world is just unparalleled. I just can't think of any, as you say, there are so many imitators.
Yeah.
And there are so many, his legacy is huge, and the artists he has impacted is huge, but there's just no one else really like him still and ever. It's
unbelievable. And I also, in turn, then think about the troupe of people around him, right? His constant collaborators, obviously, and Angelo Badalamenti, right? Who we lost a few years ago. And it almost kind of inextricably linked in my head. Like, I can't really think about David Lynch's films without thinking about Badalamenti's music, obviously, who scored Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive, and basically everything from Blue Velvet onwards, he scored the music for. Carl McLachlan and Laura Dern, of course, right?
And thinking of them... Again, thinking yesterday when we heard the news and going, oh, God, we're going to have to...
Yeah.
And everyone going, have you read Carl's post yet? And I'm like, no, haven't read it yet, because that's extended family, That
was the thing that set me off, actually. That was the first thing that made me cry, was reading Carl McLachlan's post about it. Yeah. Because, that's the other really encouraging thing about... Because I'm sure you've experienced this as much as me, Steph. Experienced a lot of heartache with artists that you admire turning out to be not good human beings, right? And we've had a lot of that over the last 10, 20 years or so, right? And by all accounts, like, judging by the reaction, judging by the amount of people like Laura Dern, like Naomi Watts, who just wanted to work with him again and again and again, he sounded like he was also just a good egg, right? Just a good person to work with. Yeah.
Women who want to work with him over and over again as well in, you know, some pretty challenging, what could be pretty challenging films, challenging circumstances, that he is a companion to so many of these people and a mentor. And I was saying to Wes yesterday, it makes me laugh that one thing I gleaned from listening to A Room to Dream is like, he is a top shagger. Like David Lynch,
my God, he
fell in love so many times.
He was married. Was he married 4 times?
Oh, so many times. And you know, he you know, some of those definitely overlap. Some of those relationships definitely overlap.
Isabella Rossellini,
people
right?
Fell in love with him on, you know, everyone. But the overwhelming message is, of course, everyone fell in love with David. Everyone fell in love with David. David loves so many people. And yet even his ex-wives don't seem to have much of a bad word to say about him. They are still lifelong companions. And there's something about him that he's carried them with him, even when he's not with them. And you just think, okay, there's something there about his heart.
Absolutely. And he does love the ladies, Steph, doesn't he? And of course, there has been criticisms leveled at his films about a certain male gaziness, maybe even a certain sleaziness about his movies, right? And I think also he sort of owned that in a way, right? And I think that that's okay. Films can be sleazy, they can be sexy, they can be all those things. But yeah, how do you feel about that kind of like slightly male gaziness to his movies? I've
never really had a problem with it, to be honest. Mm-hmm. It's always, as you say, it's always kind of been owned. It's always made sense for me. You know, and a lot of his films are about, you know, exist in the dark underbelly. They are kind of crime. They are noir. They deal with sex and relationships and power, and so it's all kind of come part and parcel for me with that. And I've always found, again, in a kind of two-tone way, his female characters on the one hand feel, you know, quite 2D or quite stereotypical, but on the other, they're not at all. Like there are some really complex female characters in there, and I think of Wild at Heart, and I think of Blue Velvet, and
oh wow, yeah,
it wasn't an issue. It never was an issue for me in particular with regards to David Lynch's work over anyone else's.
I've spoken about this a lot with Stacey when we've talked about Twin Peaks, because you know, Twin Peaks had this reputation, as Stacey was saying, because she had never seen it and really didn't know anything about it going into it. Like, she had managed to avoid pretty much all spoilers. The thing she knew about it was that she was expecting it to be this quite sexy show. Like, she remembers the old Rolling Stone cover of Audrey and Donna and Shelley on the front cover, and
in the jeans,
and she and the Audrey tying the cherry stem with her tongue. Like, she remembered it being this show that had this reputation as being quite a lot of sexy young girls in it, basically. And I think she was quite surprised that that's not really what Twin Peaks actually is when you watch it. Like, it does have beautiful women and girls in it, but actually there's this really fucking dark, horrible story about these girls, and I won't go into spoilers with it, but obviously there is this real theme of like older men exploiting and abusing young girls. Like, that's really what's at the crux of Twin Peaks, right? There's so much about it, about girls being trafficked to Canada, to brothels. There's like abuse going on behind closed doors. There's like all kinds of really dark stuff, and it tends to be about men, right? And there's a line famously in it as well where a character of Albert Rosenfield, the FBI agent, talks about the evil that men do. And essentially, I think that's what a lot of his movies are actually about. They're about the evil that men do specifically, right? He's unbelievable at creating scary men, like Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, Willem Dafoe in Wild at Heart, like Bob in Twin Peaks, like these, particularly like aggressive, threatening, predatory men. He's amazing at creating, and I think he's putting, again, the things that scare him on screen. You know, yeah. It's
not an endorsement, is it?
No, gods, is there, because there are no redeeming qualities to Frank Booth in Blue Velvet, for example.
No,
right? You know,
absolutely not. Just so frightening, and Bob is just the embodiment of evil. There is nothing more frightening, really, to my mind, than that image of Bob climbing over the...
Oh, my God.
Well,
this is the other thing. So this is the next topic I was going to get onto, and then we'll read some comments. But how good a horror filmmaker he was, right? Because in a way, you know, like, it's hard to categorize any of his movies, and it's hard to say any of them are just one thing, whether they're just pure horror or noir or mystery or whatever. They're kind of everything. Like you said, they're kind of wacky comedy and romance and whatever. But pretty much every single one of his movies, even The Elephant Man, has like nightmarish imagery, right? Like, there's something about the uncanny that he nails above any other filmmaker I've ever known, I think, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you know, about his filmmaking is an uncanny experience, and it produces such a spectrum of emotions, but the ones that do linger with me the most are, you know, levels. It's weird. It's like the opposite. It's like levels of unease, but also levels of compassion and understanding and love. It's very strange. It's a very strange push and pull all the time. But yeah, that, you know, you covered so much of Lynch in your Body and Mind series, because he is so fascinated with that, with body and with mind and with the grotesque and with the bodily and with disability and, you know, the horror of suburbia, peeling back that layer of sort of superficiality in the suburban, in sort of apple pie America, in Hollywood, you know, that LA glamour, and exposing what's kind of underneath. So you could so easily class almost everything he's done, maybe not a straight story, but almost everything he's done as a horror of some kind, because it lingers with you in that uncomfortable way. Yeah.
And actually, I suppose that's the other thing about him, is that he is through and through an American filmmaker, right? As in, his movies are, in some ways, you could read all of his movies about America in some way. Like you say, whether it's kind of middle apple pie America, whether it's suburbia, whether it's kind of industrial Philadelphia in Eraserhead. Or, of course, like for the majority of his last few films, LA, right? Like the kind of the city of dreams and the city of nightmares at the same time. And I always think of that. Obviously, there's that duality, like you said. There's the pure, there's the love, there's the goodness, there's the doves that Laura Dern talks about in Blue Velvet, and then there's the severed ears, and there's the bugs, and there's the crime, and there's the abuse and the sadism and everything else, and they kind of live side by side in his head in America, don't they? I think particularly. And I always think of that line, I think Donna says it in episode 1 of Twin Peaks, where she says, I feel like I'm having the most beautiful dream and the most horrible nightmare all at once. And that's the perfect definition of all of his movies, right? In a way, you know, that duality.
Absolutely. That's totally it. It's playful and repulsive and confusing and fascinating and funny and disconcerting and absurd and horrifying. There's just, there's so much duality.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it so much. So we'll go through some of his films in a minute. I want to read some comments because, again, like we talked about, just this outpouring of people and so much love, you know, for him and his work. So I won't have time to read all of the comments, unfortunately, but I'm going to read through some of them now. Callum said, I took a media studies class in my last year of high school, mostly just to fill a gap in my timetable. Within the first couple of weeks, my teacher made us watch Blue Velvet. Jesus. And it instantly, fundamentally changed everything I thought film could be and everything I wanted to do with my life. That led me to university, which led me to my job, where I met the woman I'll be marrying in a matter of months. In a weird way, I owe my own little family, my career path, and my love of cinema all to David and his work. I mean, that's amazing. And again, like we've both said something similar, right? I think me becoming I guess a cinephile, if you want to call it that, like a film lover and a horror film podcaster and everything else. I think like David Lynch I owe so much to David Lynch for that. I think like that need to want to discuss movies and analyze them with people, right? I think that so much of that comes from Lynch. Yeah. Rob, this is from friend of the pod, Rob Watts, who is a massive fan. Me and Rob Watts basically met. We bonded through our love for David Lynch as well. Rob says, I'll really miss David Lynch. No other creative has left such an indelible mark on my life. In his work, he asks questions, dares to dream, and creates nightmarish visions that are impossible to forget. I love that he was obsessed with the golden age of cinema and the beauty in derelict Polish warehouses.
So true.
Sums him up, right? I mean, again,
Perfectly.
something we didn't mention. His favourite film of all time, famously, was The Wizard of Oz, right?
The Wizard of Oz.
He loved it.
yeah.
He loved a Technicolor fairy tale, right? And again, the purest example of just like the good and the bad, and very American story as well. Yeah. And Rob said, first time I saw Blue Velvet at university, from the first time I saw Blue Velvet at university through to Twin Peaks, The Return, and beyond, Lynch figured constantly in my life in some way. The most precious gifts of all he gave me was the opportunity to get lost in, enjoy, and discuss his work with others. I made close friends by bonding over his work. And then he's put, looking at you, Mike, and he brought me closer with many others. His work and ability to do that will never change. Rest in dreams, David. Oh, thanks, Rob. Chris Newton, friend of the pod, Chris Newton, said, the outpouring of love for David Lynch over the last 24 hours has been incredible. It seems there's not a single person I know or follow online that hasn't been affected and influenced by his work. In these days of perpetual bad news on social media, it's surprisingly beautiful to witness such a widespread amount of positivity and warmth, despite it being for the saddest of reasons. But then that's a fittingly Lynchian concept, isn't it? Find beauty in the darkness and comfort in horror. I console myself with a hopeful theory. I love this. It's widely accepted that the world fell apart when Bowie left us. I like to think that now Gordon Cole and Philip Jeffries have been reunited. That's David Lynch and David Bowie's characters in Twin Peaks, for people who don't know. Gordon Cole and Philip Jeffries have been reunited. Perhaps everything will start to get better again. As Cooper said, I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
That's genuinely made me well up a little bit, that. Genuinely. That was really beautiful.
So beautiful. Mike says, for someone who has such a unique, surreal, and plain weird body of work, it's amazing to look back on his achievements, creating one of the best jump scares in all time in Mulholland Drive, running one of the most iconic television series ever made, providing hope for many with his COVID weather reports. The outpouring of love since the news broke has been amazing. And then he's put including from NASA. Did you know this, Steph, that even NASA posted about David Lynch yesterday?
NASA.
Incredible.
He did love the moon, famously.
He loves
Linked
the moon.
to the moon.
Mike said it's a testament to how much he genuinely changed the world. Oh, I love this. Tara says, I'm a trainee counsellor and psychotherapist, and I keep thinking about how Lynch had a grasp on the human psyche that someone like me could train for years to try and get, and I still wouldn't even manage a fingertip's worth of what he could. Chris Newton and I were talking about his childlike purity of Lynch's visual work. I think that feeds into the fact that his vision, his art, his life was his and his alone. His existence was unfettered by the theoretical perceptions of others, and this is why he could connect with this terrible beauty in the world and translate that to his work. I love that. And it's true. He understands the psyche. He had a natural flair for it, didn't he? Like, again, how many times have we watched filmmakers try and do dream sequences, right? But nobody can do like dream logic like he can, I think, right? We talked about this when we discussed Eraserhead, but there's so many moments in Eraserhead where it's like the dinner scene, for example, where I feel like I'm in a literal nightmare, It's so weird.
There's just nothing. It's like a channel straight into his brain. I would love to know what a day in the mind of David Lynch would have felt like, because it's a scary and a beautiful place.
Yeah. exactly. Alex Ailing, friend of the pod, says, I always appreciated how David Lynch was so forthright in leaving space for the audience by resolutely refusing to ever explain any of his art. He forced all of us to engage with it in our own individual ways, guiding our experience, but ultimately leaving the final word to us. Of course, he's inspired other artists across film, music, and beyond to create more daring, experimental, or avant-garde pieces. But for me, much more important is the audiences he has inspired to widen their tastes, engage with challenging work, build communities to share and discuss their interpretations, and most of all, just let go and enjoy the ride. I'm a better movie lover because of Lynch, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Oh, it's so interesting as well how all of us have mentioned this about like almost a kind of sense of community around his work as well. Like, you want to watch it with other people. You just want to discuss it with other people. Like, it's definitely got that vibe about it, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't, I mean, people will try, but you can't gatekeep with David Lynch.
No.
Like, you just
can't solve it, right?
Yeah, because there is no wrong answer.
Yeah.
So there's no right or wrong answer. So you cannot gatekeep. So you cannot be wrong.
No.
And for, a body of work that, should feel in some respects intimidating because it's so ungraspable. I don't know. I think that actually just opens it up more, and it feels more accessible for me because I think you can bring anything to it and take anything you want away from it and like it or dislike it. And it just ultimately, it's the right thing for you.
Totally. I think that Lynch himself would have really pushed back against the opinion that his movies are, I don't know, like more highbrow or more intellectual than mainstream movies, for example, right? And this idea that if you don't get it, you're not clever enough to get it. Lynch himself would have hated that, I think, right? Like, I think his films are weird and they're hard to grasp, but not in a way that I think makes you come out of it feeling a bit stupid, for example. Like, I think, for example, not to be mean about another filmmaker, but I would say that Chris Nolan at his worst is like that. Chris Nolan and his storytelling is like, if you didn't get my movie, then you just didn't get it, Yeah. And I feel like Lynch would never do that. He'd be like, just enjoy it for what you want it to be, basically,
I think he's like a man with quite a simple life, didn't he? And a simple approach to life.
Yeah, he wasn't like super intellectual or academic or anything like that. Yeah.
No, he just, he's a guy that with a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
Who loved painting, he was quite happy doing his thing in his art studio and creating new things for himself, seemingly. A lot of it, probably won't ever be shared.
Yeah.
It does just feel, I think someone said unfettered. It's, there's a lovely simplicity to it.
Yeah.
And a natural, it was all just his natural state of being, wasn't it? And his... Yeah,
I think you mentioned the word, and a couple of the listeners have, like childlike almost. It's no less accessible than a child writing a scary story or drawing a scary picture, right? Like working on instinct almost, and just putting that in such a beautifully realized way on film. Yeah,
which is what makes it so effective as well, because I think it taps into something that we, on a subconscious level, that we can't even begin to understand, and yet we know about ourselves. And that's what makes it such compelling and frightening viewing a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly that. Also, I loved how much he loved a cigarette. I mean, obviously, bless him.
The man fucking loved it.
He loved to smoke. And obviously, bless him, he had emphysema at the end there, but...
It's the way he was going to go, Mike. It always was.
He knew it. We always knew it, exactly. But, like, it's so funny. It's so apparent in everything he made as well that he thought smoking was the coolest thing in the world, didn't he? Like...
He did, and he wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. It smells like shit. It's very bad for you, but it looks really, really cool.
It looks really cool.
It does, and he wasn't... I'm imagining him with an oxygen tank and a cigarette right at the end, just like, absolutely. Nah, he lived his way. Yeah,
a coffee and a cigarette. Some
and
amazing,
a donut.
Yeah, some amazing music playing in the background. Like, yeah, exactly that. Whitney says, it's a very sad day for the world. A truly unique individual was lost. I was introduced to Twin Peaks at a young age while my parents watched it on television. Bob crouching behind the bed haunted me for years. Revisiting the show as an adult has opened my eyes to a new world that's beyond explanation. His work inspires so many, and he will truly be missed. Yeah, I mean, again, the amount of people that have mentioned stuff like that too, that images of Bob or the man behind the diner in Mulholland Drive that have just haunted people forever, right?
Absolute nightmare fuel. I still get nervous at that diner scene, like actually nervous. And it's like, why? I know what's coming, but I just...
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, yeah. Charlotte says, it feels almost ridiculous to mourn for a person I never knew, but I suppose that was the genius of Lynch. I didn't know him, but his films spoke to me in such a way that few others could. Eraserhead was the first film I watched of his as a teenager, and it was the first film where I understood what cinema could do, what it could emote and say just through visuals. The sense of place and emotions he could produce in his films is something that few others have been able to replicate for me. I was hooked. I watched all of his films. Each time they would wash over me and transport me to a completely surreal and yet familiar world. Even though they were ambiguous and had no definitive answer, it didn't matter. For 120 minutes, I'd be allowed to enter someone's singular vision, and that was enough for me. Yeah, I love that. And always those contradictory terms that we're using, dream and nightmare, beauty and horror, like Charlotte said, surreal but familiar, right, as well. Like that was the magic, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Ross Kane said, how many other directors have given us moments as terrifying as Winky's Diner, the evil guy at the party in Lost Highway, Bob behind the bed, any scene with Frank Booth, the list goes on. Yeah, I mean, oh my God. Last year I did that live stream for raising money for cancer research, and I did a 24-hour live stream, and I was doing, you know, different talks with different people every hour on the hour all through that 24 hours. And the last 2 hours of that 24 hours that started at like I think 5 a.m. and ran till 7 a.m. I was like, what am I going to do then? Like, I'm going to be lacking sleep. I'm not going to be able to get any guests to join me at that point because it's too weird a time. It's just going to be me. What am I going to be able to talk about when I'm in this like semi-conscious state? And I was like, I'll do David Lynch.
David Lynch.
It's, for one thing, it's the thing I can talk about, you know, with my eyes closed, like no prep needed. And also, it's kind of right to be in that kind of semi-conscious, sleep-deprived state, right? So I think that I spent that 2 hours counting down my top 10 scariest David Lynch moments, right? And again, so many to choose from. Like, what a fun list.
A plethora.
Yeah. And let's see, I'll just read a couple more. Paul said, as a teenager, I remember wearing my Eraserhead t-shirt constantly and freaking myself out by listening to the soundtrack daily. Oh my God, the Eraserhead soundtrack.
Oh,
that is...
What are you doing to yourself?
That's hardcore. Paul said, at that point, I'd only seen the film once at a late night showing in a flea pit cinema in Lincoln, and it was the start of my obsession. For me, he's the greatest filmmaker of his generation. He had a unique vision that has provided not only some of the most disturbing moments in cinema, but also some of the most beautiful. And then Paul's put Laura Dern's speech about the robins in Blue Velvet. I know people find it cheesy, but I find it genuinely moving because Lynch really means it. And I love that. That's true. It's so cheesy, but it's kind of earnest. There's an honesty.
It's so earnest.
Yeah.
It's so earnest.
Yeah.
He was incredibly earnest.
Yeah.
And you can't fault that.
And Emily says, you'll relate to this, Steph. Emily said, I found David Lynch by accident. It was the late 90s. I was a teenager and a huge Marilyn Manson fan. And then Emily's put sigh in brackets.
I know. Speaking of problematic artists.
Oh my God. And then Emily said, a friend excitedly told me he had seen Lost Highway and Marilyn Manson acted in a porn scene. He failed to mention it only lasted seconds. Watching Lost Highway blew my mind. I saw it 3 times in one weekend, taking notes, trying to figure out what I'd just witnessed. That was the early internet days, so there wasn't really much out there in the way of fan theories, but I loved attempting to piece the puzzle together and would speak about that movie to anyone who would listen. Oh, I love that about Lost Highway. I feel like Lost Highway, of all of them, is the one that I constantly, against my better judgment, I want to solve. Like, I want to piece it together like it's a puzzle. Do you know what I mean?
I literally said this earlier when I grabbed the mic and said to Wes, like, I'm going to go and do this podcast now. And I was like, I'm trying to remember, just trying to remember the whole filmography, having not watched some of those films for a few years. I just went, oh, the fuck is Lost Highway about? And he was like, that guy murdered a guy, didn't he? I was
he murders someone and then he turns into
my...
somebody else. That's the main...
Yeah, I was like, that can't be my trivia. I was like, what does he mean? That feels like a cold, impenetrable one, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. It does. It's got a different vibe, that one. And let's get into it. I want to talk about, like, we finished by just running through his filmography, really, and we'll just talk for a couple of minutes about each of these things, and we'll try not to spoil, because again, there are still some people, and what's been really lovely as well is I've had a lot of messages and emails from people saying they discovered David Lynch through this podcast and are still kind of working their way through some of his movies and TV shows, so that's so nice. So we won't go into depth or spoil anything, but I'd love to just talk a little bit about some of this stuff. Actually, first of all, did you ever see any of his really early, like, weird student short films from the 70s? Because they are the stuff of nightmares as well.
I've watched, I know I went back and dipped into some of them, especially when we were prepping for that, when I was prepping for that first Eraserhead episode with you, because I was like, fuck, I've got to have a look at, where did this all come from? I must be an expert, but
so weird. So
it was always there though, wasn't it? You can see it from the very beginning. It's kind of, all of those pieces have been in place from the very beginning.
Movies, so you can watch most of these on YouTube. Six Figures Getting Sick, it's one of his earliest, really weird kind of animated thing. The Alphabet, which is genuinely creepy, really creepy. It's only about 3 minutes long. Just YouTube it. David Lynch, The Alphabet. A film called The Grandmother. Again, very creepy. There's some weird body horror in there. He did a film called The Amputee, starring Catherine Coulson, the log lady, as well. So a lot of these kind of early experimental films he did, where he's just kind of experimenting with the form, it feels like, at that point. He's just experimenting with what he can do with celluloid and, that famous... And I think we talked about this when we talked about Eraserhead, but that move to film happened when he was painting one day, and he talks about it, doesn't he, about, like, the wind coming in through the window and the sunlight, and suddenly his painting began to move, and he suddenly thought, a moving picture, and, like, that was why... It was why he wanted to start making films, so I love
such a storyteller. That absolutely amazing. Listening to that A Room to Dream, I would love to get to directly compare the audiobook with that, with the actual book, because I was like, so much of this felt like he was just spinning off anecdotes, just like, another thing, and then would go, and I think this can't be in the book. He's just it just seems like he's just ad-libbing the whole thing.
It's so good. And I also love the behind the scenes footage of Twin Peaks: The Return as well, which is at this point in his career so adamant on having complete creative control, obviously, and just hating that kind of meddling of the network or the producers. And there's these amazing clips, I think, again, you can watch them on YouTube, where he's just like yelling at people for trying to hurry him along or hurry a scene along, right? And he's like, fucking A! And he goes, there's no room to fucking dream. I just love him so much.
What is this with everybody?
No.
What is it? Really?
Me.
Why? I'm serious. Fucking A, man. It drives me nuts. Who gives a fucking shit how long a scene is?
It's so good. So his early shorts, really interesting. They are like moving paintings, all worth checking out on YouTube. But let's talk, Steph, about his first feature film, which was, of course, Eraserhead from 1977.
Mary usually does the carving, but maybe tonight you'll do it, Henry. All right with you?
Of course. I'd be happy to. Do I just cut them up like regular chickens?
Sure, just cut them up like regular chickens.
You can listen to me and Steph talk about this movie for about 2 hours over on our Mind and Body series, right? And Steph, that was, the first time we ever podcast together, right? Probably the first time we really ever even spoke to each other, I think, properly.
Outside of Twitter.
That was not an easy first film for you to discuss.
Steph, summarise the plot of Eraserhead. It's like, oh, fuck me. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've got to make a good impression. There's just a lot. There's just a lot of, a lot to contend with there. And God. It's, obviously a very hard film to summarise.
It's a hard film to watch, actually. It is a hard film to watch. Yeah, it's not one that you can just pop on, you know? Like,
No, but it hits all those Lynchian beats, you know, that we've covered, like the dreamlike quality, the fascination with like factories and industrial landscapes, the amazing use of sound design, the musical interlude, you know, you've got In Heaven.
Oh my God. Yeah, the woman with the puffy face.
The weird puffy moon cheese woman in the radiator. The early appearance of Jack Nance, you know, marking the beginning of their sort of friendship. Yeah. Because he's absolutely someone that maintains collaborators throughout his career and his life.
Also, do you know what I find watching Eraserhead more? I've now probably seen it about 6 or 7 times, including hosting a screening of it in London. It's actually the film of all of his that I've come to think is one of the funniest as well. And I think that might take people by surprise initially with Eraserhead, but I find it hilarious as well in places.
It's incredibly funny. I think it really is. Like the dinner table scene.
Oh my God.
It's crackers. It's absolutely crackers.
The woman going, I'm pulling a really ugly face right now, but it's when her eyes roll back into her head and her tongue comes out, right? And she's having some sort of seizure while a tiny chicken moves and bleeds.
The chicken on it's just so repulsive. That baby is, you know, iconic, but absolutely minging.
You were quite shocked when I said this in our first conversation, Steph, but I find it quite cute and adorable, that baby.
I don't know what's wrong with you. You little freak.
I feel so sad for it when it gets ill and it gets little boils on it.
Yeah.
Oh my God. But yeah, that was the film, right? I mean, he became this kind of cult underground success from that film. It played for years in like late night. It
was like midnight movie, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was like come and double bill, you know, pink flamingos in a Eraserhead. It was like that kind of. And by the way, what a double bill!
Quite the double bill.
Yeah. But
strong distribution for that, and it was oh my God, names are going. It will come back to me in a minute. Ignore that. It will come back. I was going to say it was Mel Brooks, wasn't it? Mel Brooks who saw Eraserhead and went, David Lynch. He's the guy to direct for The Elephant Man.
Yeah. And he described David Lynch as Jimmy Stewart from Mars. This like all-American, like lovely apple pie friendly man, but one from another planet. Almost,
damn straight.
Right? Yeah, damn straight. So yeah, exactly. Like we've heard these stories many times, actually, especially in Hollywood. Like a new young indie filmmaker makes something really odd and then suddenly gets like handed a Hollywood picture, right? And sometimes that can go really badly. Sometimes it doesn't. But off the back of Eraserhead, Lynch was given The Elephant Man to direct. Oh my God, Steph, like what a beautiful film, right? The Elephant Man is.
So heartbreaking. It's actually,
oh my God.
It's one of the films I've watched the least, but it's because it upsets me so much.
Same. I find it too much. Yeah.
It's too much. It's really painful. And one of his more accessible films. I guess it's got some surreal elements, but it tells the story of Merrick in, you know, through fairly conventional means, I guess.
Yeah. It's pretty conventional classic, beautiful storytelling. It does still have those moments. Obviously, it's black and white cinematography, looks absolutely stunning. And it has those weird sequences with the mother being killed and an elephant and those kind of slow-mo, droning dream sequences that you get occasionally where you go, oh yeah, it's David Lynch, right?
Yeah, the use of machinery, like the work, it really places it into that industrial atmosphere, doesn't it? So you can see those threads for sure. And sort of fascination with the human condition, with bodily deformity and sort of compassion and exploitation, the exploitation of other people, like power dynamics. That's something that crops up time and time again in his work. Just incredible performance from John Hurt, like the one that I remember him for the most, I think.
Totally.
Anthony Hopkins, great film.
And I guess Eraserhead kind of proved that he could do out there, weird, nightmarish stuff. But The Elephant Man proved that he could do real heart as well. Because like we've said throughout this whole conversation, he's the man that can give you the weird nightmare stuff, but he also is full of heart, right? Yeah. And that is... Elephant Man is just... this movie that will just make you cry, basically,
and
right?
You can totally see why that real story and that real case would speak to someone like Lynch.
That amazing shot where Anthony Hopkins' character sees the Elephant Man for the first time, and there's that slow zoom in on Anthony Hopkins' eyes as his eyes begin to water. And again, like, David Lynch captures those images, like particularly close-ups of faces. I feel like he's really good at, isn't he? That kind of thing. And that film was massive commercial and critical success, nominated for 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Lynch. Didn't win, and he never ever won an Academy Award, Steph. I mean, not that of course that means anything, but God, I mean, he deserved it.
What did they know, honestly?
Yeah.
What do they know?
I hope they give him some sort of tribute at the Oscars.
Yeah, he better not just get like a little flash in the pan either.
He better not be just like one part of a montage.
A photo montage. No, thank you. Alongside the guy from Hollyoaks or whatever. Like, no.
Well, do you know what will be interesting? I think at the moment the favourite to win Best Supporting Actress is Isabella Rossellini for Conclave, right? And I wonder if she'd mention him in her speech, It would feel weird almost. I mean, not obviously that he had anything to do with this role or this film, but just as somebody that was such a strong collaborator of hers and such a big part of her life, I wonder if she might say any words on stage about him,
Yeah, I hope so.
Elephant Man, huge success. So at this point, David Lynch was like, he could do no wrong, right? He had created this masterpiece. And so Hollywood...
You're building him up here.
I know. Well, this is it. And then what was the studio? So I think it was Universal, right? Universal and the Dino De Laurentiis production company basically handed David Lynch a blockbuster movie to direct. And actually, in the gap between Off the Back of the Elephant Man, he was even offered films like Return of the Jedi to direct.
He was, wasn't he?
The
Can
Star
you imagine?
Wars sequel. And famously, impenetrable filmmaker David Lynch said that he read the script of Jedi and couldn't understand it, so he turned it down, which I love. But instead he decided to direct space opera Dune, right? And had the worst time, right? The worst time of his whole career. Working with Hollywood, being under that kind of corporate control, trying to make the film he wanted to make, but also being kind of having to adhere to the source material and to what the studio wanted. And obviously the film is such a famous mess. It's a famous flop, right? I mean, I think everyone is in agreement. I know it's kind of considered to be a bit of a fun, campy, so bad it's good movie these days, but it's not a good movie, Steph, is it, really?
No. And it's another film that's kind of got like a bit of a cult following now, but was disowned by Lynch himself. Like you say, such a, wanted and needed, ultimate creative control. The final cut, and he just didn't have it here, and ultimately the film was, it suffered for it. And I think it was one of those films, like a film adaptation of Dune was like it was a bit of a long-standing effort, wasn't it, with many sort of trials and failures before he was even recruited, and then it was supposed to be like a 2-film thing, and he went down condensed into one, and it just wasn't it makes sense that he would be attracted to something like Dune over Star Wars, you know, and again, a story that deals with corruption and monstrosity and sort of a fading past and a crumbling present, all of those kinds of things. But yeah, I just...
Bless him. It's just not David Lynch material, is it, really?
No.
And he famously, it's credited as the director Alan Smithy, which is famously the name that directors give, right, when they don't want to be credited.
Don't put my name on it.
Don't put my name on it. He had a terrible time. But notable for being the first collaboration with quite a few key figures. So, you know, before there was Timothy Chalamet, Steph, there was Carl McLachlan playing Paul Atreides, you know. So
also very sexy.
Very sexy man. His first collaboration with Carl McLachlan. You also had like very, very young, tiny little Alicia Witt playing Paul Atreides' younger sister, Alia, in that film. People like Patrick Stewart were in this. Sting was in it.
I was going to say, you've forgotten Sting, Mike.
Everett McGill, Big Ed from Twin Peaks, was in this movie as well. Jack Nance, of course, was in it. Brad Dourif was in it. So
great cast.
An amazing cast, and a kind of fascinating film in a lot of ways, but one of those kind of historic, fascinating messes. And so that was sort of it for his relationship with Hollywood, right? For the rest of his life, for the rest of his career, he never really worked with big, major Hollywood studios anymore. And then instead, like most of the rest of his films were kind of more sort of financed by European, you know, production companies and producers and that kind of thing, right? So obviously then we get Blue Velvet, Steph, 2 years later, which in a way, that really, you could almost argue that is the film where David Lynch arrives as David Lynch. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it feels like the quintessential Lynch, doesn't it?
It is. Like, I always say to people, like, if I wanted to introduce Lynch's work to somebody, I wouldn't start with Eraserhead. I'd start with Blue Velvet and be like, this is David Lynch to a T, you know?
For so blue, as lonely as a blue star.
This is David Lynch. This is probably his, well, I don't know, I waver between sort of this and Mulholland Drive. I think Mulholland Drive might be my personal favourite, but Blue Velvet is probably his best.
I agree. I think it's technically his masterpiece in a lot of ways, Blue Velvet. It's so good. Like every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, it's perfect, really. Like it's pretty perfect. Obviously, this story of this little town, that iconic opening sequence with the white picket fence suburbia, you know, neighbors waving to each other, everyone looking happy, but then just that weird dread. And as the camera, like, you know, slowly moves down below the garden lawn, we see all these bugs eating each other, and then, you know, this severed ear and everything. And it's like, it's got really simple imagery, Blue Velvet, hasn't it? And it's got very much like the good guys and the real bad guys and the light and the dark and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, it's very simple. It's wearing its themes on its sleeve, but it's just such a good movie, you know?
Yeah. And visually, it's sort of, you can really see where Lynch's love of painters like Edward Hopper kind of come into play, as you say, in terms of location and shadow and colour and noir and all of those elements. Just, I mean, it's a really fucking scary film, actually.
Oh my God.
It really freaks. It's not a nice film to watch. And I love it, I do, but Dennis Hopper is obviously singularly the most scary thing about Blue Velvet, but there's so much else. It's an incredible soundtrack again, and
so this is Angelo Badalamenti for the first time.
So I was about to say it's his first
Cruz
time, right? Yeah.
Well.
Oh, Julie Cruz.
Yeah, doing the mysteries of love in this film as well, in some of those really cheesy moments. So yeah, it really looks and sounds like a Lynch movie, right? I think, yeah.
And is it Laura Dern for the first time in this.
Yeah, Laura
Yes.
Dern for the first time, who looks so young. Isabella Rossellini for the first time, of course. And again, like, it's her movie, really, isn't it, in a way? Like, we all remember those scenes with her and Dennis Hopper while Carl McLachlan watches from the cupboard. So scary. And you know the bit that scares me the most, Steph, every time I watch it, is the scene in the brothel with the kind of, what's his name? It's the character played by Dean Stockwell, Ben, and he is singing Roy Orbison's In Dreams. It's like, again, it's pure nightmare fuel.
Absolute nightmare. Yeah, absolute nightmare. I can't say that word, nightmare fuel.
Yeah. I mean, it like you say, it's a really horrible film in a lot of ways, isn't it? It's really kind of oppressive and tough to get through in certain scenes, but just a masterpiece. And again, like, a much smaller film than The Elephant Man, but it was like obviously a huge critical darling and did him so well. And then I think this really kind of established David Lynch as this much more kind of almost art house indie filmmaker, right? And then of course, off the back of that, we get Twin Peaks, right? Which Twin Peaks, the pilot that was shot in 1989, the series then shot in 1990 and 91, and this. It kind of feels like a natural evolution of Blue Velvet in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's the fucking goat. It is.
Oh.
If I had to take, like, I don't know, 3 pieces of media with me and experience them for the rest of my life, I think this would be there. For, as you said before, like, for all its faults, for all its Jamesisms, I'm here for every bit. I fucking love it. And you cannot overestimate the influence of it on television and pop culture. And I know there's so many pieces coming out in the past couple of days talking about this, but it was more than just the moment it aired and that water cooler discussion that audiences had. It like pushed the boundaries of what stories could be told via the medium and how their creators could tell it. And it convinced showrunners, you know, that this can work, that, you know, it challenged audiences' perceptions and expectations. Like, we wouldn't have so many other television shows without Twin Peaks. We wouldn't have Sopranos or Lost or True Detective without this show. It's just... incredible.
Honestly, and obviously, like, I'm watching it every week and I'm recapping every episode at the moment, and one of the things that Stacey and I say almost every week is, how the fuck did they get away with this on network television in 1990? Like, it wasn't even cable, it was ABC. It was like it was up against shows like Cheers and, you know, Seinfeld on like a Thursday night on network television in like 1990, and we were getting this mad, dark story about this like murder, rape victim and all of the dark secrets going on in this town, and told in this kind of weird art house way with dream sequences and everything else. Like, it's incredible that it even exists in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely, you know? Unreal.
Yeah.
It's totally unreal. And it's such I mean, you must be getting this a lot at the moment by doing the podcast, but it's so much. I mean, firstly, for me, I feel like every 6 months I'm like, I could do with a Twin Peaks rewatch. I really could. Like, all the time I'm due a Twin Peaks rewatch, and I think I only watched it like 12 months ago. I need to stop. But also, what a joy when people experience it for the first time. And you're like, you're watching it for the first time. They're like, yes. And it's just, it's one of those things that I'm like, tell me everything, how you're feeling. Let's go through it.
This is one of the things that I think starts here as well in his career. I mean, I guess a little bit Blue Velvet too, is the mystery. How good he is at a mystery, and how much David Lynch loves a mystery, right? And just that, even though his films get so complex and layered, the initial hook of like, who killed Laura Palmer is just such an easy, accessible way into this world, isn't it? Yeah. Like, it's just a simple whodunit, and then we peel back the layers and it gets weirder and darker. But like, he's amazing at that. It's the same with Mulholland Drive. Like, who is this woman with this bag of money? Like, that's all it is, really. And then we peel back the layers, and like, he's very good at knowing how to grip us with like a hook.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Pretty much every single film, actually. I was thinking through the premise of, if there is, a premise of each. And I was thinking, they're all kind of, they tread similar ground.
They do. Whose is the severed ear?
Yeah.
And it's just like little simple mysteries that hook us in. Love it. Obviously, incredible television show. My favourite of all time. Unceremoniously cancelled after just 2 seasons, Steph, obviously. But, also in a way, not that surprising.
Amazed that we got through to, especially season 2. Amazing that we got through that, really. But
Yeah. And actually, literally this week is the week over on our Twin Peaks rewatch podcast. We're doing the final episode of season 2, that incredible Black Lodge episode, which again is like, can't believe they got away with that on network
ending
television.
On a high. Just an unbelievable closing episode.
Yeah. But while the first season of Twin Peaks was going on, David Lynch also went off and made Wild at Heart. Wild at Heart premiered at Cannes in May of 1990, literally at the same time as Twin Peaks was the biggest thing on television. And this movie was a huge success. It won the Palme d'Or, right? Big deal. What do you think of Wild at Heart, Steph?
Wild at Heart is a classic example of a Lynch film that I always remember fondly. And I'm like, that's a lot of fun. And then I put it on again and I go, it's kind of fucked up. At the same
really
time,
dark.
it is
really dark.
I love Wild at Heart. Amazing central performances from Laura Dern and Nicolas Cage. And what sticks with me, I guess, most about Wild at Heart is that blurring of fantasy and reality that we talk so much, but particularly, as you mentioned, the interweaving of The Wizard of Oz, which we know that Lynch was obsessed with and took great inspiration from. On the one hand, you can spend forever attempting to analyse and tease apart every aspect of his filmmaking and what it means, but at the same time, probably more than half the time, he is just throwing stuff in for the pure playfulness of it. And I often think of that when I think of Wild at Heart.
Yeah, me too. Love the Chris Isaak song Wicked Game as well.
Yes.
And
Willem Dafoe.
One of my favourite Nick Cage performances. I mean, Nick Cage and his style of performance is perfectly suited to David Lynch. Like, in a way, I'm sad that they didn't collaborate more together.
Yeah, he would make. What does that say? I don't know, but they would have. They work. They seem like they're a perfect fit together.
Yeah. Totally. And obviously for Laura Dern, this was a much more raw and brave performance than anything she had to do as Sandy in Blue Velvet, right?
Gorgeous.
As well. Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Incredible.
That moshing scene, that frantic moshing dancing scene.
So good.
Incredible.
So
the lipstick scene is Wild at Heart, isn't it?
Yes. The mad mother that puts it all over her face.
Something
so that was Diane Ladd who played the kind of scary mother who was Oscar nominated for that film as well. Like, incredible performances in this movie. Yeah.
I don't think I'd clocked how many award nominations and awards that Lynch had received over the years. You kind of almost assume because he's such an oddball that a lot of his films would fly under the radar, but actually they've had so much critical acclaim.
Totally. Yeah, they definitely, especially at this point, he was like the biggest thing, right? He was the biggest, coolest person in the industry that everyone wanted to work with. He had this hit TV, the biggest TV show in the world in 1990, and the Palme d'Or winning film at Cannes.
Wild.
He was kind of top of the heap by this point, I think, in 1990. And I think there's something about Wild at Heart too that feels very proto-90s to me, pre-Natural Born Killers, pre-Tarantino, pre-True Romance. It feels like a kind of prelude to those movies, doesn't it?
Tarantino's talked a lot about David Lynch being an influence, hasn't he? And you can totally see it. Yeah,
he really kind of, with this and then Lost Highway, really kind of captured that 90s vibe, didn't he, I think, David Lynch? Yeah. Speaking of, I mean, actually, first of all, let's talk about, so that movie, huge success at Cannes, huge critical success, and then, and then the movie that got booed at Cannes and was actually labelled the worst movie ever made by certain critics, and that's Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Steph, what was wrong with people in
It's a
1992?
bit fucking harsh, isn't it?
Honestly.
Worst movie ever made. I mean, for sure, one of his most challenging works.
Yeah.
On an emotional level for anyone with epilepsy. I watched this. I'm sure I've said this before, but I finished Twin Peaks as a box set. I'd borrowed it from my cousin. We were living together, and I'd said to him, like, cool, I want to watch Firewalk with me. And he was like, yeah, it's 11:30 at night, don't do it. And I was like, no, I'm cool, I'm going to watch it tonight by myself. And he was like, no, don't do that. I didn't sleep for like 2 days. It just fucked me up. Absolutely, yeah. But, the film that goes deeper into Laura Palmer's backstory, and it's about 200% more gutting and frightening. But
Absolutely.
It just, I mean, I feel like I need a strong disposition every time I go in to watch it. Like, I have to be in the right frame of mind.
Yeah.
But I still think it's phenomenal.
Oh my God. I think it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's in my top 3 maybe Lynch
Is it?
films. Like,
Excellent.
I think it's perfection. I can't believe, and I guess I can believe why people didn't. Twin Peaks was such a thing, and then it ended on a cliffhanger, right, at the end of season 2. And then he announced he's making a Twin Peaks film, and everyone was like, great, we're going to get a follow-up.
Well, more, yeah.
And then, no, David Lynch was not really interested in what happened in season 2 of Twin Peaks. He was still obsessed with Laura Palmer as a character. So he made this prequel instead about Laura Palmer, and I think Twin Peaks fans were frustrated because it didn't feel like Twin Peaks. It was much darker. It was much more of a horror film, much more disturbing and graphic. It didn't have any of that quirky coffee and pie kind of comedy to it, right? There's no Audrey Horne or Pete Martell. None of your faves are in it. So fans were disappointed, and then non-fans were like, well, what the fuck is this film? Like, what is going on?
Yeah. I'd be interested. I mean, for a lot of people, I'm sure they watch this naturally after having seen the TV show, but I would be interesting to know the experiences of people who had watched this first with no...
Actually, I do know a lot of people that have and still loved it, and I think it's over time now become kind of known as, like, appreciated as one of his best films, I think, So, yeah, for whatever reason, people just got it wrong in 1992, I think.
They absolutely got it wrong. And we got the ultimate Davids. We got David Bowie and David Lynch. Like, come on, guys.
God.
Fucking... Yeah.
Phenomenal stuff. David Bowie in that movie. And also, actually, Cheryl Lee as Laura Palmer.
Oh, yeah.
One of the great performances in cinema history, I would say. Like, just gut-wrenching and beautiful, Yeah.
Totally.
So there you go, Firewalk with Me, 1992. And again, he really struggled after that. After that film was such an epic failure in so many ways. And he kind of went quiet for like 5 years, right? And then he came out with Lost Highway, which I know a lot of people have kind of talked about almost as like a kind of emotional reaction to Firewalk with Me. Like, and a really angry, dark, like fucked up movie, right? With such a really kind of industrial feel to it as well. It just has such a different mood, I think, Lost Highway, doesn't it, to anything up until that point?
Yeah, I think angry is a good way of putting it. It's his like first tour around the dark side of LA, isn't it? Yeah, playing with identity and doppelgangers and
so good.
Fucking banging soundtrack once again.
Incredible soundtrack. Again, like 9 Inch Nails, Rammstein, David Bowie's I'm Deranged, right? Like some incredible stuff. Very different vibe. It's not... this movie kind of marks his new era of Lynch, right? Like, he's done with the white picket fence, suburbia, jazzy kind of music and apple pie. It's now like... dark, noiry
like
LA thrillers.
Nighttime Hollywood drives.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I love it. It's an absolute fave of mine, this one. And like I said, every time I watch it, I desperately want to solve it. You know, like I want to know what is going on. And it gives you just enough information to kind of think you can almost piece it together, but you can't quite. Yeah. It's
Mike's doing a lot of like puzzle.
I'm doing a lot of Rubik's cubes with my hands.
Really trying to Rubik's cube.
It's so good. And also, how scary is that mystery man, the guy that approaches Bill Pullman at the party?
Just a horrible lingering image. Just totally creepy.
Amazing film. Absolutely amazing. So a couple of years after Lost Highway, in a way, you couldn't get more different to the darkness of Lost Highway, right? The Straight Story, a Walt Disney produced, like PG-rated movie about a guy going on a road trip on a lawnmower.
Oh, just, again, I mean, ultimately it makes sense, doesn't it? It really does reflect Lynch's sense of wonder about the world. And, sort of feels uncharacteristically simple in its delivery, but it's warming, and it kind of grapples with mortality and grief in quite an upfront way. Beautiful film, and for a lot of people, they talk about this being their favourite David Lynch film as well. Like, it is beautiful. I can totally get that, and it was a film that I didn't watch until quite late. Like, it was probably one of the last films I watched of his, because I was like, why am I going to watch the PG lawnmower with? But will I like it?
Same. It was the last one I came to.
Absolutely loved it. And Richard Farnworth and Sissy Spacek, amazing. Harry Dean Stanton, a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous film. It's kind of not what you'd initially think of as a Lynch film, but you know, true story of a man who rode a lawnmower across the Midwest. I mean, that does have Lynch all over it.
It kind of does, doesn't it? And he loves a road movie, I guess.
He does.
Double bill it with Wild at Heart as road movies.
Brilliant road movie.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love it. It's a beautiful movie, The Straight Story, 1999. And then, of course, 2001, we get Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive, of course, I'm sure everybody knows this story, started life as a pilot for a new TV show that David Lynch wanted to make, right? It's a 90-minute pilot episode that sets up all of these intriguing mysteries set in Hollywood. A woman with amnesia and a bag of money. There are gangsters. There's a filmmaker with people making threats to his life. There's a hitman. There's a creepy man behind Winky's Diner. There's all of these story threads and mysteries that are introduced in that 90-minute pilot. The pilot did not get made into a TV show, and instead David Lynch basically shot an additional 45 minutes, stuck it on the end, and transformed it into this masterpiece of cinema. He reformed and repackaged this pilot into a movie that ultimately became a masterpiece and, in a way, one of his most celebrated perfect movies, Steph.
Yeah, it's just fucking amazing. It really, it's like, what else to say, really? And it's a film of two halves, as you mentioned earlier. When you first watched it, you spend half of the movie being like, wow, this is just a really enthralling,
intriguing mystery.
Really Hollywood set, film, intriguing mystery, just totally on board, intrigued by all of these key players, and then it just turns into something utterly ungraspable that plays with that real, the artifice and the corruption of Hollywood, and it's all about regret and failure.
It's a love story in a way at its heart, right? Or a kind of an anti-love story maybe, but it's not the film. By the end of it, you realise it is not the film that you thought it was at the beginning, and it goes on such an amazing journey. It's unbelievable, and that is definitely a film that I think you need to watch 2, 3, 4 times, and it just gets better and better and better with every watch, doesn't it?
It's definitely grown on me over the years. As I say, when I was younger, it didn't hit me as well, and I found it too much like a film of two halves. And then as I've grown older and kind of grown with it, it's like perfection. And then we get Inland Empire in 2006. I guess we can say his final film, his final feature film.
Inland Empire, a 3-hour exploration into the psyche of an actress, right? Played by Laura Dern, who takes on the role of a lifetime in what may or may not be a cursed film. And she starts to lose her grip on reality. And we all start to lose our grip on what the hell is going on. His final, in a way, sort of conventional film. Although, Steph, there is nothing conventional about this movie.
I've tried twice and I just don't get it. It's not quite for me. I'm going to have to try it a third time this year for sure. It's got to be done. But it's like, maybe it'll click this time.
I think this year is the year I'm going to try it again too. I think I've seen it 3 times. It does get better for me with each watch, but I still think it is a much more flawed film. It's just not as... I think the biggest problem with it maybe is just that it looks a bit crappy.
Yeah.
It's shot on a really cheap digital camera and it's 3 hours long and it virtually doesn't have a narrative. And again, the thing that I find frustrating about Inland Empire is that it starts really promisingly. Like it begins with Laura Dern getting a role in this movie, and it's almost like the movie that she's going to star in is a cursed movie, right? And as she starts to learn these lines and play this character, it's like she starts to lose grip of who she is. And it's almost like she starts to turn into this character. And that's just the first act. And then suddenly we're in this wild, like, Polish crime story. And there are sex workers and there are dancing and there's talking rabbits. And there's like, and basically it just becomes this kind of collage of various different experimental projects that Lynch was making separately that he's kind of bunged together to create this story that only he seems to understand, I think.
Yes.
It ends up being like definitely his least accessible movie I think he ever made, right?
Oh, impenetrable, as I say.
Yeah.
It just, I really struggle with it. It's not for me.
No.
Maybe it will be one day. I'm not sure. Probably not. I think it is, as you say, like too disjointed, too much like a series of little
it's fascinating in a way, and I enjoy talking about it with people, but it's a tough watch. It's a really tough watch. If you take that kind of Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire as his kind of LA trilogy, it's Inland Empire is the toughest one of the lot, and Mulholland Drive is like a warm blanket in comparison, isn't it? You know,
and that's saying a lot.
And that's saying a lot, considering Mulholland Drive has one of the scariest jump scares of all time in it. So, you know, and then he kind of stopped for so long, right? You know, that was it. For a long time, I thought he's never going to make anything else. Like he went into music and painting and all these other projects and other collaborations, and he made a few experimental shorts here and there, but he didn't really seem like he was interested in kind of conventional films anymore until we got bloody Twin Peaks: The Return, right? His magnum opus and his final project.
This is the water, and this is the well. Drink full and ascend. The horse is the white of the eyes, and dark within.
And that feels like, as you say, with Twin Peaks, the original series, it feels like I can't believe this was made.
I can't believe it exists.
And I can't believe it exists at that time, as you say, that it feels like he'd kind of moved on from filmmaking and perhaps that didn't interest him as much, or he achieved what he wanted to achieve, and he seemed very engaged with music, creating music and painting. And then this came.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, we had all of these expectations and
it defied all of them.
It defied all of them. And it just, it was just it's just unmatched. There's nothing like it as a viewing experience. I can remember that first episode, we were all gathered together. We had like our cherry pie and our coffee at like God knows what time at night, revisiting Twin Peaks, and then just sitting and watching like a fucking box for unreal. And at the time, you're kind of baffled about it, and you're not sure what to think. You're not sure how to take it. Is it enjoyable? Is it doing what I want it to do? You know, where is everyone I know and love? And then I don't know. By the time I got to the end, I was like, that just challenged me, and I got everything I wanted out of it that I didn't think I wanted. Does that made sense?
Completely.
Like it met no expectations. What I thought I wanted, I didn't get. But actually, I do think we came out with something better.
I completely agree with you. Like it promises to be a follow-up to Twin Peaks, and it is absolutely not that. It is, I think by the time you get to the end, you realise it's this kind of exploration of art and television, the medium itself of television and how much it's changed, a meditation on Lynch's career, right? Like, I think it feels so, what's so important about it, and I think, especially as something that turned out to be his last ever thing, is that it was kind of 18 hours of complete creative control from David Lynch and Mark Frost, of course, as well, but David Lynch directed it, sound designed it. He kind of is, his fingerprints are basically all over that project, and it isn't even set out like a television show. It's like an 18-hour movie, right? And it requires you to get to that final moment of that final episode before you go, wow, like this is the story he's actually been telling us this whole time, you know. And it does. I'm so excited to get into it. You know, I'm about to start it in the next couple of weeks again, and especially now with this sad news about David Lynch, like watching his last thing, this magnum opus that he created now in that context, I think is going to feel all the more kind of poignant and moving to me, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Incredible. I'll never forget that summer of 2017 of watching it every week, right? And none of us knew what the fuck was going on from week to week. The theories, the recap podcasts I was listening to, the think pieces. It started in around June, right, off the back of Cannes, and then it finished on the 4th of September, my 30th birthday, was when the final ever episode aired as well, which felt kind of perfect to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so nice. Oh, it was meant to be. Yeah, and we had that episode, the infamous episode 8.
Oh, my God. Yeah,
fucking unreal. I remember literally jumping on the sofa when the 9-inch nails appeared. The 9-inch nails. I was like, you're fucking kidding me. Oh my God. So many people texting me going, are you watching? Yes, I'm just unreal. Trent Reznor's in a leather jacket. I just can't handle this. This is
just incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And the set pieces in that show, the glass box, what's going on in the glass box, or like you say, the whole of episode 8, what the fuck is going on with Audrey Horne? Like what, like these questions, these theories, these mysteries, like he did it again. He managed to once again create this kind of this cultural moment where everyone was watching this groundbreaking TV show once again that nobody understood and was breaking all the rules just like he did in 1991, right? It's amazing.
And at a time when I think we thought that we had done everything we could do with television.
Exactly.
Like there's
we
nothing's
didn't think
off.
we could be shocked.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's like there's nothing off limits actually in terms of what you can show, what you can do, like. So yeah, how is he's not going to be able to do anything, and he can, like.
He can,
you know.
And even though the end of Twin, and we won't spoil it, but my God, the end of The Return is nightmarish, frustrating, impenetrable in some ways. It also felt like an ending, right? Like, even though it felt confusing and baffling, it didn't feel like the end of the original run of Twin Peaks, like a TV show that had been cancelled. This felt like the end that Lynch wanted us to have, you know?
Yeah, there was a finality to it, I think, and it wrapped up in the way that he wanted it to wrap up, and it did its job. But unreal. I've kind of forgotten it was 18 hours.
18 hours.
Like, shit me. I just watched like 18 hours of...
My God. And with everyone he's ever worked with is in it. Like, everyone, like, again, Carl McLaughlin, Laura Dern, Naomi Watts, like, everyone. Catherine Coulson comes back, and there's some really moving kind of final performances from a lot of people.
Oh, God. Log Lady.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. Beautiful.
And everyone's aged and everyone's changed. And it's
so much about that, isn't it? About time and about the passing of time. And it's beautiful. And of course, David Lynch himself is in so much of it. You know, he gave his character of Gordon Cole quite a major role in The Return.
It's like, I'm not going to put myself in this, but it's because everyone loves Gordon.
And there's something, I was talking to a friend about this morning, like there's going to be something even more beautiful about a shot that happens in the final episode where we see David Lynch, Carl McLachlan, and Laura Dern holding hands, like walking into this kind of dark doorway together, right? And it's like, in a way, I obviously it pains me that was the last thing that we'll ever see that he made, but it also feels like the perfect final thing in a way, you know?
Yeah, and I don't think I expected anything else to come out of. I don't think any of us were thinking, oh, but maybe he'll do another. It was like, no, I think there was a finality to that in terms of his kind of cinematic filmmaking television career. It was like, I think he'd achieved what he wanted to achieve with that, and it is a really nice resting place.
It really is. It's kind of perfect. He made the exact thing that he wanted to make. Like, he had famously he kept threatening to quit every time they tried to like influence what he was doing, right? So he got his own way, and I think that's what I love about it, is that no matter what we want it to be, ultimately it's his vision, like writ large across 18 hours, and that's incredible. You don't get that with many of your favorite filmmakers. Like, what a gift to get that, you know?
Yeah, totally.
So there you go, Steph.
I've got the warm fuzzies, as well as it being really sad. It's like, I don't know, with some, I mean, it came as a shock, of course, that he passed, but I don't feel like it was it wasn't a tragic life cut short. No. There wasn't anything that was unsaid or unmade or, left in the open. And it's been so nice to see, again, for someone that's made so much dark material. Yeah. Everything that's been shared over the past few days has been like screen caps of either really poignant, empathetic things that he has said, or really funny, quirky little things that he's said. And it's all just been, it's all actually been quite joyful and celebratory, and it's sad, but it's, I don't know, I'm left with a sense of warmth from it. I really, really am. And it's been so nice to talk about his work and his legacy, and to continue talking about that over the next few days and months and years. Like, it's not going anywhere. Oh my God.
I'm going to be milking this all year.
Yes.
I want to go. I want to go to see all of his films on the big screen. I'm so excited to revisit everything, to carry on discussing his work with people. This is the thing. This is the joy of him, right? To finish with the impossible question, Steph, what's your favorite? What's your favorite piece of David Lynch art? Is it the Twin Peaks? Is it a film? Like, what is it?
It's definitely Twin Peaks. It's such a cop-out, boring answer, but it just is. Like, it's something that stayed with me. I've had so many personal, joyful, lovely experiences with it, made so many friends through it, as you say, stupid tattoos, drunk, cocktail evenings, experiences, like that Twin Peaks bar that they set up in London, and all of that stuff. Of course, we were all there for that front row. Just absolutely love. So that's always going to be the favourite for me. And then film wise, it probably would be Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
How about you?
I find it the hardest question, actually. Like, I think, setting Twin Peaks aside, because Twin Peaks is my favourite thing, I think, but films, I really can never decide between Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet. Those two, it's like they're so different to each other in a way, and they're both so perfect in their own ways. And Firewalk with Me and Lost Highway, it's like those four are all kind of interchangeable.
They're top tier, aren't they? Absolute top tier.
Just top tier. Incredible stuff. Amazing. Well, Steph, thank you for this. This has been very therapeutic for me to talk all of this through.
I'm glad we talked through our feelings.
Yeah,
and came out with the warm fuzzies.
And again, it felt kind of perfect, because like we said, our first ever conversation together was with a Razorhead. So I could think of no better person, Steph. So thank you for coming to join me for this discussion.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's so nice to start my evolution of horror journey with a Razorhead and to end up here. It's like,
via the Twilight movies and some other things.
Yes, God.
But until you'll be back in a couple of weeks for Fresh Blood anyway, Steph. But until then, let people know where they can find you on all the socials.
You can find me at Steph X McKenna on the socials. And of course on Fresh Blood. Yeah, can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Amazing. Steph, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
And there we go. That's it for our David Lynch special. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Steph McKenna for joining me. Thank you for all sending in your beautiful thoughts and words about David Lynch as well. Of course, the discussion is not going to stop here. If you are interested in hearing more Lynch content, of course, you can subscribe to The Detective and the Log Lady. What better time, if you've never seen Twin Peaks, than to maybe start watching it for the first time, dive into Lynch's magical world, and listen to Stacey Ponder and I discuss every episode in depth. We're bang in the middle right now. We've just finished the old run of Twin Peaks, and we're about to discuss Fire Walk with Me and The Return. So there's going to be so much Lynch chat to come over on that podcast. And also keep an eye on our events page, evolutionofhorror.com/events, because my God, we've got some exciting live screenings and events surrounding David Lynch's career that are going to be happening across the UK, which we're going to be hopefully announcing in the next few weeks. So keep an eye on that as well. In the meantime, keep commenting below with your thoughts, and we will see you again for another bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror.
Good morning. I'm wearing dark glasses today because I'm seeing the future and it's looking very bright. Should go up to around 90 degrees this afternoon, around 32 degrees Celsius, and we might be having some clouds with us, but hopefully also some blue skies and golden sunshine. Everyone, have a great day.
Together.